Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 903, the weekly show all about weather. This is the pre-show, the magical, marvelous time when we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time, we say some very, very outrageous things. If you're looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 10 minutes and you'll find it. It's going to be a good show tonight. We're going to have Jamie Rome, the acting director of the National Hurricane Center. He will be joining us along with Dr. Neil Jacobs. I think they are together down in South Florida tonight. But obviously, that'll give us a chance to talk about the hurricane season. Dr. Neil and all of his fishing buddies are going to be on the show. This is going to be a good one tonight. So strap in. I had a really rotten sinus infection. It started about a week ago, and on the show last week, it was coming on, and then it really got kind of nasty toward the end of last week. I really struggled with my voice, and I cannot lose my voice because we are so thin-staffed here. But we made it, and the voice is 99% better. Still, I can tell I'm not quite back at full speed yet, but we're getting there, so that's a good thing. But yeah, May is here. The kind of the month where everything begins to transition for most of us down here in the southern U.S. from the tornado season to the hurricane season. So it's good that Jamie's going to be on the show tonight. However, we can have some tornadoes here in May. We consider May tornado season here where I am, and I say this, all the time, but tornado season here, it's November through May. That's the core season. And yes, you can have a tornado in the summer, but it's typically related to tropical systems. But May, it does tend to calm down. The death ridge, if you will, tends to set in. And it looks like it's trying to do that now. And maybe it's over, but not necessarily. In fact, it's interesting. This month marks the 50th anniversary of a really, really nasty EF4 tornado, or F4, that came through parts of central Alabama Sunday night, May 27th, 1973, 50 years ago. And this is how old I am. I was actually there within 1 hour of the time it happened at one of the spots along the path. The tornado took out the old WSR 57 radar site, the key radar site for the state, in a community called Centerville, which is southwest of Birmingham. And it came through Brent, which is adjacent to Centerville, and killed 5 people in Brent. And it was down for a long time. I want to say it was about 90 miles. And I was ending my junior year in high school in May of 1973. And there was an urgent need for help, and had my ham license. I'd been licensed for 3 years or so at that point. And I went with some other volunteers from Tuscaloosa down US 82 to Brent. And that's about a 30-minute drive, 30 or 40 minutes. And we got on there, and that was the first time I have ever seen tornado damage with these eyes. And understand, I love storms. I wanted them. I wanted tornadoes. And I guess it just never dawned on me the serious side of this whole thing. But I will never forget what I saw down there that night. The eerie darkness, no power anywhere, the human suffering, the scent of death. A lot of the first responders have described that. And quite frankly, we really don't know what it is. There's a little sulfur and pine, but you can take a shower and it stays with you for 3 days. And I would stay down there for hours that night and then go back for 3 days after that, handling health and welfare traffic. And understand, in 1973, there were no cell phones. All the landline communications were disrupted. And again, that was the first time I've ever seen tornado damage like that in my life. And I think I had to experience that to do what I do for a living. But there's going to be a lot of events with the 50th anniversary. I'll be speaking at one down in Brent on the May 28th, the day after the anniversary, which is a Sunday. But anyway, I chased a rabbit here, but it's just a reminder that we can have some tornadoes here at the tail end of the tornado season. And then, of course, once you get into June, if you're looking for tornadoes, you head toward, Nebraska and the Dakotas and higher latitudes. And we began to shift our focus down to the south in the tropics. So, again, I'm glad Jamie is on the show tonight. So I don't know why I started so early. For a few weeks, I started late every week. And this week, I started early. I'll open up the stream here at 49 after the hour. We hit at the top of the hour. And again, for those that are new here, we really can't start until the top of the hour, which is 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern, because we join this live on local television here in this market. And we kind of have to coordinate with joining the television side. So anyway, that's the deal. So we'll have I hope our regulars show up here in a few minutes. And if not, we're in big trouble. Although I can talk for 2 hours, but you don't want me talking for 2 hours. It'll be total nonsense by the end of 2 minutes. But again, I know that Dr. Neal will kind of coordinate the show tonight with Jamie and some of the other folks down in Florida, and we'll basically be listening to them, and they are together somewhere, probably at an undisclosed location. And I think everybody else should be on the show here. I know that Troy just sent a note. He said he's not feeling well, but he should be here. I know Jen's working some severe thunderstorm activity in some of her radio markets. It looks like a bunch of warnings in parts of Missouri. I see, but she should be on. And I think everybody else is here. Although Rick said he's 50-50, Rick Smith with the Weather Service out in Norman. And Bill Murray was scheduled to be out, but his meeting was moved to another week, so he should be here tonight. And if nobody shows up in a few minutes, that'll be really weird because it is 6:55, and normally everybody or somebody's here by now. So we'll see if it's just me. Hopefully you've had a good weekend. This is still a busy time of the year for me. It's not an exaggeration. I pretty much work weekdays between 4 a.m. and midnight, and I sleep 3 hours a night, which is not really healthy. But in the morning, I do a shift at home, which involves being on television. I'm on our morning show, but in the home studio, and do blog posts, weather extreme video, 24 radio stations. And after that, I hit the road and I speak somewhere every day. And I will say the demand for science programs in schools is, for me, it's at an all-time high. I don't have an opening in the 23-24 school year. I mean, none. All right, so I see Jamie needs a Zoom link. So let me invite him. This is from Dr. Neal. And I hope, again, I invited everybody earlier today. Maybe I did something wrong, but let me get Jamie in on this. And I will kind of re-invite everybody just to be sure, because it is amazingly quiet. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think that's everybody. So hopefully if they did not get it the first time, they'll get it this time. And really, it's an automated system, so it could have possibly could have failed. All right. And here comes some other guests. All right, so I'm not alone. I was feeling so lonely. All right, so I think the first batch did go out. So Jen, did you get an invitation earlier or just a few minutes ago?
I got it earlier.
Okay, good. So that it worked the first time. That's good.
Yeah, you got it.
I just sent some out. Again, it's kind of creepy. It was like 6:55 and there was nobody here. I'm thinking, uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Oh, you're still a little stuffy. I hear it.
Yeah, but I'm so much. I mean, Thursday and Friday, I basically had no voice, and I cannot be down. I cannot be down.
Yeah, I understand
We have
that.
we have no help, and so it was a struggle. I can talk loud; it's just stuffy. But yeah, it's your classic May sinus infection, which when I get them, they typically are in the month of May for some reason. I don't know why.
Mhm.
But yeah, I am fully operational and hopefully not as nasally later this week. How's your, I see storms in Missouri, a bunch of severe thunderstorm warnings.
Yeah, nothing tornadic, which is good. I don't think the chances are high, but there's still a low end threat. So I'm kind of keeping my eyes on it. I have 4 stations in Missouri. So just mainly watch updates right now, but I'm just kind of eyeballing it for a little bit to make sure nothing weird happens. So.
And yeah, sounds good. See one warning in southern Arkansas, see some flash flood warnings in southeast Texas, and a severe thunderstorm warning near Houston. All right. So let's see. Neil, can you hear? I sent an invite to Jamie a few minutes ago.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Yes.
Awesome.
This is pretty much going to be your show. It's going to be a party tonight. This is going to be good. We will chime in and deconstruct from time to time, but it's your show. It's like, I'm telling you, I watch these news people. Sometimes I just want to say, stop. Just stop. And let's deconstruct this story. I mean, they had one Nashville hotel manager arrested for sucking on a guest's toes. Did y'all see that one?
Yeah, I got arrested. Yep.
And it's like, I wanted to just stop right there. I mean, there's a lot.
Which hotel was it, James? I need to avoid that place.
I hope it's not one of yours.
What Hilton place is that?
I don't have anything in Nashville, thank God.
But I mean, goodness gracious! I mean, we're talking about, you know, toe cheese and toe fungus and the bunions. There's all kind of nasty stuff going on down there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already sick. Don't do this to me.
Well, the whole
it was posted was it posted on their digital platform?
Yeah. So how come this guy didn't get? I mean, some guy got close to me. He'd have a bloody nose from a swift kick in the face.
You know, who's going around a hotel with no shoes on?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a whole nother issue. I mean,
there you go.
That's a whole nother issue.
He woke up in the middle of the night, Neil, and the guy had gotten into the room and was sucking on his toes while he was in.
Wait, are you serious?
Oh yes. No.
This is a real story.
Can't be true.
Wow.
No. It is on every major national platform.
I guess so.
Sometimes there's disadvantages to living in a cave.
Downtown Nashville, Hilton.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yes.
Good.
So, and
welcome
to our television viewers.
Yeah.
He looks like
there you go.
Anyway. Yeah.
Oh my! Yeah,
at least he never worked for us.
Wow.
Oh man, put a check mark by him in the old notebook.
So, Bill, if this guy applies for a job, you might want to know his background here. So, all right. So, are we
urologist?
So, are we good to go here?
I'm not sure.
No. After that, we've totally taken it down the tubes.
It's the big Hilton in downtown Nashville. Wow.
All right. Well, let's roll it. All right. Before we get in more trouble here.
More?
Yeah. All right.
We're providing a public service.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains, episode number 903, the weekly show all about weather. This is for May 8th, 2023. It's James fighting a sinus infection. Troy, you got it. What's your malaise? What's going on with you?
I had and this is the same sort of thing, so be cautious with this, but I had laryngitis here a couple of weeks ago. I was out one Monday and it traveled into a middle ear infection, which, this has always been my troublesome ear. And so I'm on an antibiotic. And the doctor gave it to me. He said, okay, listen to me and listen to me. This thing is as big as that. Okay. The
Ooh,
pill.
horse
And
pill.
he said 12 hours, not 11 and a half between them. And you better eat a big meal ahead of time. So this thing is rough
Wow.
on your system. And
Wow.
it is. It is.
Well, I feel better now about my little sinus infection. That's
Yeah.
I don't have to deal with that. Goodness.
Do you need me to recommend a good hospital or doctor to you, James?
Yeah. Well, I know a few. Well, what's weird that a lot of times they'll give you a Z-Pack when you got a sinus infection, but they only give me like 3 pills, just 3, and they said this is a new thing. It stays in your system, and I'm better. Like I say, Friday I could barely talk.
Yeah,
it was a struggle.
Yeah,
and today
I swear that pill that I'm getting is that big. And I found out I glow in the dark. I found that out in the middle of the night now. Just
what?
Kidding.
Yeah.
Just
yeah,
kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Phosphorescent now.
Yes, I glow in the dark.
So, Bill Murray, would they cancel the 50-cent beer night?
Well,
I'm glad you're
no,
here.
I looked online. There's no Hooters in St. Thomas. So I was like,
wow.
That's it for me. No, the meeting got postponed a week. So I'll be gone next Monday now.
Okay. Well,
but I'll be at Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. So that's probably a good close alternative.
So they had the Taylor Swift, concerts in Nashville this weekend, and they had a lightning delay last night. That was
I saw that. Yeah.
The show went on, but it was pretty late. So Bill, were you up there are you a Swiftie?
No, we actually had Janet Jackson at our hotel in DC, and that was kind of fun. She was playing up there.
I'm not a Swiftie. I'm an oldie.
Yeah, exactly.
Jen, so you got some active severe weather. What you got going on? Tell us.
Yeah, it's a lot in Missouri. I've got 4 stations: Joplin, Versailles, Park Hills, Poplar Bluff. Poplar Bluff does go live, so I'm kind of monitoring that. But right now, just severe thunderstorm warnings, some hail, some wind, low end tornado threat. So that's what I'm kind of keeping my eyes on. There's only 1 tornado warning I see right now. That's actually up in Wisconsin. And then there's flash flooding and severe down in Texas. So it's pretty active. It looks like an active period here next couple of days.
SPC's had their hands full, haven't they?
They have.
Outlets all over the country. Yep. That storm that passed south of La Plata, and I don't know if I'm saying it right, Missouri, you probably know, Jim. Is it La Plata or La Plata? Or something totally different.
I'm not sure, actually. But, I don't know that one.
I love my little virtual rail fan thing, and I watched that storm for about 4 hours on that camera. It was the most incredible, intense lightning. It produced 2 or 3 little tornadoes and a bunch of big hail. Not any egg ball sized hail, but lots of things around it.
Let's go to Dr. James Adelot, who is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. James, what it looks like? How's your storm situation tonight?
Pretty quiet. I'm kind of keeping a side eye on that stuff in Missouri. It could back build into our southeast Kansas counties. We've got a couple of them up there, and we'll keep tabs on that. I don't think it's too significant a threat. We got a little better chance of something rolling in here tomorrow evening. We hit 90 on Saturday for the first time. That was our first 90-degree temp. Troy's going to scoreboard me quickly on that.
Nope. Yeah, it's actually been 90s here the last couple of days as well, and heat index. I think on Saturday we had University of Texas graduation, and heat index up to about 99 or 100. So
yeah, buddy. Yes, buddy. Come on, October.
Yeah, James, our friend Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, spoke today at the National Tourism Travel Week meeting and celebration, and one of the people asked him a question. They said I'm an A&M fan, and did you do any due diligence before you let Texas into the SEC?
Wow.
And it about brought the room down, but he had a really eloquent answer for that.
Let's check it. Kim, I see Kim's online. Kim, how's the weather in Norman tonight?
It's good. It's a little bit muggy. It's been pretty humid, and that juicy air mass, of course, then helped storms be crazier off to our north the last couple of days. But we've just been in this beautiful pattern of beautiful, just sunny days and calm wind, and about as lovely as you can hope for to start May in Oklahoma.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Neil Jacobs, I see our guest is online, so let me toss it to you, and you will introduce our special guest.
All right. So Yeah, I'm excited for today's show. We've got Jamie Rome on here. He's Deputy Director at the National Hurricane Center, formerly head of the Storm Surge Unit. Hi, Jamie. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's nice to be with you.
So yeah, I am broadcasting from my home base in South Florida. Been mostly working, but doing a little fishing. Yeah. So Jamie, what's new? What's going on at the Hurricane Center?
Oh, it's never a dull moment at the old weather bureau. No, it's been a good off season for our staff. Who've been busy upgrading lots of applications and models. We upgraded our probabilistic storm surge model last week, which will give us a number of computational advantages over the previous iteration of it, not the least of which will give us coverage for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So for the first time ever, we're going to have real-time storm surge and ocean predictions for the Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands should cyclone impact them. The ability to simultaneously simulate two cyclones at once, which is obviously, for obvious reasons, increasingly important. We're extending our tropical weather outlook from 5 days to 7 days, which I'm guessing is the upgrade folks listening here.
Yeah, can you explain that to people? Because I think a lot of people, when I saw that press release go out, got confused and thought that all of a sudden you were going to have like a 7-day cone or something.
Yeah. So no 7-day forecast, no 7-day column this year, although we continue to experiment with it internally. It's just not yet ready for prime time. But what is ready, and for folks that don't know, we do internal validation and verification on all of these upgrades for usually a couple years to ensure that they're ready for prime time. So what is ready for prime time is the extension of our outlook. So this is the tropical weather outlook, or what you usually look at to determine if a seedling system or a tropical wave might become a tropical storm or a hurricane. So so if you remember the color coded, it's yellow, orange, and red, or low, medium, and high. That will be extended from 5 days to 7 days this year, which we think and hope will give coastal communities a bit more lead time to prepare for potential impacts, which as coastal population increases, if you haven't been paying attention, it's like everybody in the United States moving to Florida. As coastal populations increase, the lead time these communities need to prepare for impactful systems has gone up, pretty much exponentially.
So let me back up here for a second. I think most of our listeners and viewers know who you are, but give us sort of a brief rundown of your career and how you got to where you are.
Luck. Lots of luck. I feel like I've done every job in the under the sun. I started and a lot of people don't know this. I started at EPA. I started my federal service at EPA as like dispersion modeling, the transporting pollutants year round. And then opportunity came up to go to the Hurricane Center, which for a young single guy was seemed like the greatest thing ever. So off I went to Miami in 1999, and Hurricane Floyd chased me down there, it seemed like. At the time, it was the largest peacetime civilian evacuation in United States history. Obviously, it's been overcome by subsequent storms. But that's a heck of a way to get your start in the weather service. And then did several jobs within the Hurricane Center. I've actually worked in every operating branch and the front office during my career. So I've done, I've been a marine forecaster, I've been a hurricane forecaster specialist, worked as the executive officer, the deputy director, storm surge team lead, to basically bounced all around. Just because the work is so interesting. I mean, if anybody's out there is interested in working at the Hurricane Center, I want to give it a ringing endorsement. The work is just really, really, really interesting and diverse. And recently I landed as the deputy director, and it seemed like on day 2 as deputy director, Ken Graham, my former director, announces that he's leaving and going to be the director of the National Weather Service. And I was like, oh man, I didn't sign up for this. So by default, by virtue of being the deputy director, I became the acting director, and that position takes so long to fill because of all the backgrounds and security checks necessary that I ended up being the acting director of the Hurricane Center for my first year as deputy director of the Hurricane Center. And obviously, everybody's seen the announcement. The permanent director has been seated, so now I'm back as deputy director, which is a far more comfortable place to be. So I'm settling in. I've never been deputy director, so I'm learning. I'm learning how to be the deputy director. So it's really interesting and fascinating to sort of jump around from positions and almost learn, constantly learning how to do these jobs as you move around.
So what was it like to be the acting director during an entire season? Like, give us an idea of like the stress level and what your daily routine was like.
Yes, it was insane. It was interesting. I think that's the key word, is interesting. But it's like overnight you go to being the grandfather of the center. Like, you're supposed to be the most mature, knowledgeable person in the building, and it happens like overnight, which is really, it's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. And then obviously one of the more visible positions within NOAA, which is a learning curve all to itself, to be thrust in that kind of spotlight. And then I thought I was just going to cruise along here and have like a relatively calm season. You remember last hurricane season got off to a really slow start. Like, it was sort of like the talk of the town. Why is the season so slow? And so I thought I was just going to cruise right on along, and then all of a sudden, bam, the season turned on really, really fast. And the part of the Ian narrative that is often forgotten is early in the forecast cycle, Southeast Florida was threatened. So there for a while, I was having to go through the motions of possibly having to do a shelter in place, which is what we do when inclement weather is threatening South Florida, and you have to go through the whole motions of continuity of operations, which is very formal, rigid process. So it was, I felt like I had every imaginable thing thrown at me as I was still trying to digest. How did I go from deputy director to acting director in like the span of, it felt like 2 days. But in looking back on it, it was such a rich learning experience, and the opportunity, and it's like a privilege to be asked to lead the nation's hurricane program. So when you sort of now that I can sort of step back from it and decompress, what a cool opportunity to be entrusted with the reins of the nation's hurricane program. And the staff of the Hurricane Center was just absolutely, top-notch, phenomenal. They all stepped up to the plate and stepped into the situation. And, I couldn't thank them enough for helping me through that transition. And more than that, just being a friend during that process. The staff is just, phenomenal.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of bonding and stuff that goes on, particularly if you're in a situation where you're doing a shelter in place while you're forecasting, and these people are literally living at the office while they're doing their job. I don't think a lot of people actually realize what goes into that. What kind of stuff do you do, like, for bonding? Like, it's like everyone knows what their day job is, but like outside of that, like, how do you get to be this tight-knit family?
For me, I would talk to the staff about non-work things. I would ask them, some of our staff are starting families, trying to buy a house, routine life challenges. And I would just try to talk to them about that, and try to get beyond the work challenges. In many cases, we would, try to hang out in social settings outside of work. We try to have happy hours and things like that, just to try to make the job. The job can be all consuming. I mean, I can't, and Neil, you appreciate this, former administrator. I mean, it consumes you, like your every waking moment. And there's not a lot of sleep. So when I say every waking moment, I mean it. It consumes you. It really is your entire life. So to help people sort of work through that, and I also spent a lot of time trying to help people step into the purpose of their job. Often in government, you're beat up rather, and more so now in modern times, you're beat up pretty badly. It just seems to be almost a hobby to beat up on government these days. So I would help try to remind people of their sense of purpose, like their sense of duty. They've been called upon to do these things, and that often helped quite a bit, just to sort of break through the traditional conversations of what we're going to do today in the office, and try to talk about more human type daily discussions.
I think that's important. I mean, I don't know if they teach this in like leadership classes or whatever, because I've never actually had any formal leadership training, but I feel like getting to know your employees on a personal level goes a really long way. And not just getting to know them, but the fact that they know that you care about them outside of their ability to do their job. I think it's really important. Like so you had to do a lot of TV media hits, like all that kind of stuff. Like, is working down at the Hurricane Center and the job you were in, do you get any sort of professional media training, or is that just you learn on the fly, you just get thrown straight in? Like, what's the training for that, if there is any?
There isn't. I mean, there isn't a lot of training. We do have some, so obviously for somebody coming into the center, we do try to provide them some level of training that consists of usually, we'll set up a camera and record them doing interviews so that they can look back on their interviews and sort of review it. I actually, when I became acting, when it was announced, I reached out to a number of my media colleagues within the community and sort of said, solicited their advice on, what do you recommend? And that proved really, really, really valuable to hear from people who do this for a living. I mean, they do this every day. And so, it was, some of the stuff was common sense, like smile more on camera. Apparently I don't smile enough on camera. But, other stuff was more how to project a level of energy. So the TV people here will totally respect this, but the camera can sort of mute your personality quite a bit, and so to project a level of energy through the camera, you almost have to be a little bit larger than life, right? So you got to get used to that, and then coming up with the correct tone through the sequence of a hurricane, right? So in the beginning, you can't be too intense, too scary, right? Because you'll evoke panic. But at some point in the evolution of a hurricane, when it becomes clear that it really is going to be a impactful storm, you've got to up the body language a little bit to try to hopefully motivate the masses to take protective action. And it's the subtlest little things like that. That's the part that I really came to appreciate through this experience is just the subtle, small stuff that really, really matters. Like, for example, during Ian, we started at the video wall with sort of me standing up, like, talking about the video wall. And at some point we moved to the traditional media desk. And it was that movement to the media desk, which for some people communicated a seriousness, like, a seriousness. So just the simple act of changing the stage or the setting, if you will, ended up being a communication mechanism on its own.
So I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. I've got some more questions, but while we're on this topic, can you talk a little bit about the story behind the term unsurvivable?
Oh goodness! And you were there. You were there.
I was. I remember that. I remember that day.
It was less calculating than probably people would like to think. So, we were getting feedback. If you go back to the night before that term came about, we were getting feedback through the night. Again, going back to Nobody Sleeps.
Wait, so what storm was that? That was headed towards Louisiana, right?
That was Laura. And so we were getting feedback that from emergency management officials that people weren't evacuating or taking action to the level that they were hoping. So we were getting that feedback all night. Ken Graham, the then director of the Hurricane Center, was getting that feedback, and then we got up in the morning and we talked about it and what to do. And if you remember, that was the morning that the aircraft was crisscrossing the storm, and seemingly every pass was a more intense storm. And I got frustrated. I felt like I was chasing the storm all morning, like I couldn't keep up with the rapid intensification. And at some point, I said, that's it. The storm surge is 10 to 15. The model itself couldn't keep up with these updates. Like every time you would reinitialize the model, before the simulation could finish,
Yeah, I remember looking at like the drops on data, and every time it would go through, it was a couple millibars lower, and the T equals 0 in the model was like 3 passes behind, and the winds hadn't caught up to the pressure drop yet. That's when I knew it was going to explode.
Yeah. And so at some point I just got frustrated, and I think I said, that's it. It's 10 to 15 feet, and that's unsurvivable. And it just came. I didn't think about it. It just happened. And it was on an internal National Weather Service call. We're just sort of coordinating the forecast and the watches and warning. And the reaction on everyone's face when I said unsurvivable was like, whoa. I mean, it stunned everybody on the call. And that's when we realized the power of that particular word. So it certainly wasn't premeditated or calculated. It just came about, almost accidentally. But the look on people's faces when I said that, and then Mike Brennan, who's now our director, sort of came to me afterwards and said, what do you think if we were to use that term in our public forecast? And I think everyone at the time was 100% behind that. And then we did it. And I had, in all of my years at the Hurricane Center, I have never seen anything snap the messaging or bring the messaging in alignment as effectively as that. I mean, it really to this day is a remarkable thing. And that's why we haven't used the word sense, is because we want to make sure we don't overuse it. I've just never seen anything bring instant coordination of the message as effectively. And looking back, even though Laura hit a relatively less populated area than other storms, it appears we had 100% evacuation compliance within the hardest hit area, and yet and no storm surge fatalities from that storm, which is remarkable. But the other story that no one told about, Laura, is look at a map and look at the track and look how perilously close it was to Houston, Galveston.
Mm-hmm.
And look at the lack of evacuations in Houston, Galveston. That's the story that nobody really ever talked about in that case. And that took, I tip my hat to the emergency managers over there. That took an incredible amount of trust in the forecast and the forecasters. If you remember too, the European ensembles were plastered all over Houston, Galveston. I mean, they were all over Houston, Galveston. So there was every reason from a traditional evacuation protocol perspective or historical perspective to call a rather large evacuation. The emergency managers over there just had absolute faith in the forecast and in the forecasters. And that probably saved untold lives. If you remember from Hurricane Rita, the mass evacuation that took place from the Houston and Galveston area, I think we lost 104 people in the evacuation alone, just the evacuation process. And so that restraint and that level of precision in the forecast probably saved a tremendous number of people that we could never count.
That's a skill that I think a lot of people don't realize you need to have in that position, is actually calming emergency managers and governors and other sort of folks that are in charge of these evacuations. Like, because it's easy to just have a knee-jerk reaction and tell everyone to leave. Like, what was it, Dorian, where they wanted to evacuate Dade?
Oh yeah, Dorian
and head people north, which is exactly where you don't want them to go. Like, what is it like trying to convince them to not take action because things could be worse?
It's really weird. It's a great question. Every fiber of your being as a human, every emotion inside of you is telling you to get amped up or to be excitable or to be jumpy, or every stimulus around you is telling you to be anxious and nervous. And so you almost have to have this internal calm within you that says, no, I can't be anxious and nervous, because people are going to read that body language. They're going to, so much of communication is body language and inflection, right? It's not the words you say, it's how you deliver it that matters. And people are looking at you and your body language and how you tell that story, if you will, for mental clues about how you really feel, like the secret forecast behind the forecast, right? And so you've just got to project calm at all times, even though every ounce of every fiber of your being wants to be anything but calm. And you remember in the case of Dorian, I mean, it was parked so close off the south coast of Florida, I could see the cirrus canopy when I drove in the morning. And from a historical evacuation perspective, Miami-Dade and Broward would have been evacuated, under, old school. I mentioned Floyd was my first storm, very similar track, and look at the differences in not only the warning philosophy but the evacuation philosophy from those two storms. And so Miami-Dade evacuated nobody, Broward evacuated nobody, and Palm Beach did a very surgical evacuation along the immediate coastline, which in retrospect is really quite remarkable. And so out of curiosity, I asked the Broward County officials afterwards. I was like, why did you not order an evacuation? Why did you not order evacuation? I'm curious. And literally they flippantly looked at me and said, because you guys said there was no storm surge. And I was like, that is like, I could retire right now and be happy, because that is like textbook execution on their part.
That could have gone so sideways with all those people getting on 95 North. It would have been a disaster, and especially if that storm would have actually gone further west.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically, if you order evacuation of South Florida, the primary artery out of South Florida is I-95, And so you're basically sending people into the storm. Well, guess what? They're driving up the coastline with 4 million of their counterparts. There's no hotels, so they keep driving. So they go up the coast and there's no hotels, and they keep driving. So they go to Georgia and there's no hotels, and then they go to South Carolina and there's no hotels. You basically run them straight into the path of the hurricane if you're not careful. So again, another textbook case of restraint from emergency managers in that case. I mean, that storm was just right on our doorstep. So, a great case. And I remember talking to you. I think you were plotting aircraft fixes. It was so close to being a problem in South Florida.
Yeah, we were looking at that. That was when the high altitude jet was deciding about doing these not the cross sections, but the I guess the circles around the outflow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was crazy. Like I remember thinking this is a category 5. It's about to stall, and everyone was like, trust us, it's gonna stall. And it takes nerves of steel when that thing's sitting like literally half an hour east of the beach.
Yeah. And with the thing about hurricanes is a few hours makes a difference. If that stall would have occurred 6 hours later, basically stalled on right on the coastline of Palm Beach County, which would have been totally different outcome. So everything it's a punishing line of work, because the public perception of what we can forecast often exceeds forecast uncertainty. People want to know if my backyard is going to flood, is my roof going to get ripped off, or is my tree going to get upended, and obviously our ability to predict that a couple of days in advance is still quite limited. And so we have to communicate risk, which is really hard in modern society, where people consume information in 140 characters. It's really hard to convey risk. But that's where we're trying to go at the Hurricane Center is switch our products, communication, decision support to a risk-based approach. I think it's going well, but there's an expectation in the world of perfection. And when you're conveying risk or probabilities or that sort of stuff, there's no such thing as perfection. So that's a challenging part of it. Is there's often a vocal minority that will appear after a storm that will claim the forecast was, not less than stellar.
I know him and others probably have some questions, but I got a couple more for you, Jamie, before I hand it over to the rest of the crew here. So tell us, a lot of people in NOAA, at least in my experience in NOAA and the Weather Service, tend to look at DC as this black box where seemingly incoherent decisions sometimes emanate from, speaking for myself. You did some time in DC. What was that like? Were you at OSTP?
Yeah, so OSTP, Office of Science, Technology Policy, is an arm of the White House, Executive Office of the President. It's basically the President's Science Advisor has a team of experts from different fields that advise the Science Advisor and hence the President on matters of science policy. As part of a leadership development program, I got the opportunity to go up there and do a detail. And I'm going to confess, this is breaking news. I'm a policy wonk. So I absolutely loved it. I love to see how policy was made or not made. It was absolutely fascinating process, and what I learned has served me well even in my regular job. Even if you don't like the process, knowing the process is very useful in one's daily job in government, and I just loved it. It was a cool. It's look, everybody wants to make everything political these days. Whoever occupies the position or the White House, it's still the White House. In the ability, the opportunity to go there and work and see how it all plays out is fascinating. And you'll appreciate this, Neil. Everyone told me, advised not to go during transition, meaning from one presidency or one administration to the next. And I deliberately—
Oh, that's the wildest time to be there.
I deliberately went during the transition from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. So I got to see both sides of the. So it's not just the political spectrum of two parties, but the spectrum of sort of a seasoned administration on year 8, right, versus an incoming administration on year 1. So to see that, was just really, really rewarding. I learned so much and just got so many cool opportunities during that time. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I don't want to do it for a living, but I wouldn't trade that experience for the world.
I gotta imagine that that's a pretty cool experience. So for folks who don't know, Jamie actually was a recipient of a Samuel J. Hyman Service to America Medal, otherwise known as a SAMI. It's probably the most prestigious medal any federal employee can get. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be and what that experience was like.
It was so much of my career surreal. I mean, I prefaced this with the conversation about luck. So we'll go back to that narrative. I didn't see it coming at all. I didn't. So they're really good at keeping sort of the wraps on the process. And then I was like a nominee, and so I was like, oh, that's nice, that's really nice, but I won't win. And then I went up for a breakfast. They have like a breakfast for all of the nominees, and I started looking around the room, and there are people there doing terrorism, trade violation, law enforcement. I mean, there were people there doing developing vaccines. So I just looked around the room and I was like, yeah, there's no chance. There's no chance of people doing this type of work. And so mentally, I just sort of like, hey, it's just fun to be here. I'm happy to be at the breakfast. And then one day they called and said, you won. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really surreal. And it was for the work in storm surge, developing storm surge warning and communication systems. And it was so much fun. You have a gala, which for a federal government person, you don't get that type of treatment, that type of, you don't get to do that type of stuff. So that part was super fun. I had a ball. They invited my family to come up and be a part of the festivities. It was super fun, and the partnership, they're just top-notch, professional people who really go above and beyond to promote government service, government employees, which is increasingly important. I mean, I sort of talked about this earlier. It's in vogue now to take pop shots at government and government employees, but many of us, do it. You're not doing it for the salary. I can assure you of that. You're doing it for the sense of purpose and the opportunity to give back or to participate in something bigger than oneself, which is rewarding above and beyond the pay. But a lot of government employees make huge sacrifices, and their families, more importantly, make huge sacrifices with these jobs, and the partnership does a great job of sort of casting a light on all the remarkable work that they do. I had a chance to go back after that for a ceremony. I wasn't the recipient, and the two scientists that invented the COVID vaccine or enabled it to rapidly come to fruition. were recipients. So it was super cool to meet them. So a lot of good work happens inside government. If you just punch through that thin veneer of government is just boring. A lot of really good work happens within the federal government.
That's a pretty elite circle you're hanging out with there. So
they were, and the COVID vaccine inventors were super chill, super humble about it all.
So let me ask one more question. I'm gonna turn it over to everybody else. And I would just say, what do you do in your free time? But I already know the answer to that.
Fish.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about fly fishing and some redfish adventures down in Flamingo.
Oh my goodness. So if you're not familiar, Flamingo is a part of Everglades National Park. It's on the extreme southern tip of Florida, a relatively uninhabited area of Florida, but it is just the most gorgeous. I mean, I love it down there. Just pure, unspoiled real estate, and the fishing, especially if you hit it right, is just probably the best in the world. So I'm told I've got a bead on red fishing on the flats. I don't know. We'll have to seek confirmation on this from an outside source. And the most recent trip this past Friday yielded some epic fly fishing for redfish on the flats of Flamingo. So we'll have to ask an outside source if this is true or not. But
I would independently confirm that story.
Yeah. So if you ever get a chance to visit Everglades National Park, and specifically go out, it's just an absolutely untouched, beautiful component of Florida. Most people know Florida for the urban areas and Disney and that sort of stuff, but our national parks, also Biscayne National Park, absolutely just gorgeous, but they're primarily water, right? So most people are used to national parks being land. You can hike it, you can drive through it, so it's relatively accessible. But our national parks are more water forward, and they're a little the entry to accessing them is a little bit more difficult. So that's good and bad. So it's good and bad in the sense that it's hard, but it's good for people like me and you to have this much beauty and be absolutely and totally by yourself. Just by yourself for an entire day is just great mental therapy.
It is kind of wild to just drive miles in a single direction in a boat and then show up at some tiny island that belongs to the Park Service and find out that they actually have bathrooms on that island.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of great hiking. I'm a huge proponent of the national parks. If you can't tell, these are posters behind me highlighting various national parks. I love the national parks, and I go to them frequently. So this is Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, Denali National Park, Everglades National Park is right there, and then Zion National Park over in the corner. Just beautiful places. And Everglades doesn't get the Everglades National Park doesn't get the recognition that, like, for example, the bigger parks out west, but it has a beauty to it that is for me epic. And then to see someone on the front of a fly fishing boat cast a fly to a redfish and watch the redfish just absolutely devour that fly right in front of you is at least for me just good stuff.
So you kind of hinted at this, Jamie. It's good to see you. Thank you for being with us. You kind of hinted that maybe you and Neil had done some of this fishing adventure together. I was surprised, Neil, when you introduced Jamie, that you didn't go through in the biography how far back you guys go. There was a reason you guys that Neil's been leading this interview. How far back do you go, Jamie?
This goes back to what? I'm going to guess 99.
No, sooner than that. When it was, so I got to NC State in 96, right after Fran.
All right. So it'd been 97 then, right?
Yeah.
So you guys have known each other since grad school and came up. And
Yeah,
do
we both went
things
to,
together
we
like
both went to, North Carolina State, which is the finest institution in the country. We both went to North Carolina State University for our graduate. Neil was going for his PhD. I was going for my master's. But we weren't lab mates, but we were close enough in proximity and physical space that we might as well have been.
That's terrific. Okay, so that wasn't my real question. I told Neil I had a question. Here's the real one. I want to go back to your description of everything you've done to build the culture in the workforce and have everybody, like, them personally, have people know each other personally. I'm curious, in such a high profile job, like doing these hurricane forecasts where there are millions of people hanging on every single update. It's very visible. I mean, I feel like that means you in your office need to have a lot of trust and respect for one another, because from forecast to forecast, you're trying to represent one National Hurricane Center voice. And so, to foster that, can you just talk a little bit about the human element of producing that forecast over repeated forecast cycles and how important it is to have that cohesion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that. So it happens over the course of many, many months, many, many years. And this is where the off season for us is so important. We're spending so much time together. Many of us are on the road nonstop. Thankfully, that part of my career, I think, is behind me. But many of us are on the road nonstop, and we see each other more than our families. And so, as sad as that is to say, that offers a tremendous opportunity to bond with each other. And we spend a lot of time. We really focus on this at the Hurricane Center. So many people think about the Hurricane Center from the hurricane forecasting part, and that is unique, and that is worth the price of admission. But to me, it's the other part of the hurricanes, the training that the Hurricane Center instills upon you, the discipline, the calm, the camaraderie, the ability to trust other people. These are really critical life skills that you can use outside of hurricane forecasting. A lot of us know our counterparts, their spouses or partners or wives, husbands, that sort of stuff, and we interact sort of almost as a family with each other, and that camaraderie is built in the off season. You don't just show up and make a forecast and have that much trust in one another. And if anybody could ever see the behind the scenes at the Hurricane Center, I don't know if they would be enamored or how it would go. I'm not sure how it would go. But it's remarkable to see a small group. So the Hurricane Center is not big. That's a part that we don't do a good job of advertising. It's not 200 people banging away. It's a relatively small group of people, and to see a major hurricane and 2 or 3 people kind of working, it's kind of shocking for people. I'll tell you a funny story, because everybody likes inside the game sort of thing. We deployed an outside person, a weather service person during Ian. It was our first time working a storm. And at one point, she kind of pulled me aside and goes, do you guys know what's going on? Do you know what's happening? And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, everyone here is so calm and so quiet, like calm. And I said, yes, we know precisely what's going on here. And that's precisely why everybody's calm and quiet, is because that's what creates the level of accuracy and professionalism that people expect. Certainly chaos wouldn't help. But yeah, that's a great question. I would love to talk to someone who has expertise in social and behavioral elements to see what it is we're doing to create that environment of trust, because it's probably a deeper subconscious part that I don't understand the process well. Because it would be fascinating to sort of almost learn from it. Even though I'm a part of it, I still feel like I could learn what it is we're doing that creates that level of trust. Great question.
And Kim, that sounds like an assignment right there.
Yeah,
For
if only I
for
knew
sure.
someone who maybe was attached to NSEP who knew about people and stuff who could help us with that. I mean, I think it is interesting to think about, cataloging it, but you guys are also, like you said, in so many ways, a very unique center with very unique pressures, and the hazard itself has unique forecastability. And so, the way that you've cultivated a culture that rises to that challenge is really special and unique as well. And I think that that's worth highlighting.
If I had to guess, and this is not from profession, so this is a wild guess, I'm going to guess that the intense pressures and being beat up after the storms creates that environment. I mean, I think we all know, some of the stories that played out in Ian and in the media, but that rallied the Hurricane Center like more than anything else. Like the staff really came together during that, and so there absolutely is an element of it. We're sort of in this. We're in this together, sort of thing. So there's probably a component of the external pressures that are contributing to it, and someone like me that doesn't have doesn't have training in this, isn't processing it. And I give you a lame explanation of, we spend a lot of time together in the off season, right? That's probably a very surface oriented explanation, but it would be fascinating to do a deeper dive and try to really understand the level of trust, because what will be most fascinating for people on the outside looking in is how much can be accomplished with our staff with relatively few words. Like, we can, like say, for example, this year when I was acting director, I might have 1 to 2 minutes between media hits, and I could unplug the microphone, and the amount that could be accomplished and communicated in that really, really, really short amount of time would absolutely fascinate people.
And Jamie, you've alluded to Hurricane Ian, and of course we all watched that very closely last August. We had Allison Ray from NBC in Fort Myers after the storm, and it was extremely emotional and hard to watch and talk about. And you talked about the calm at the Hurricane Center, but talk about that storm from a meteorological standpoint and some of the forecasting aspects and any other observations you had about it.
So anytime you have a storm approaching a coastline and that angle of approach where a small deviation is going to make, you change the angle of approach by 10 degrees and 50-mile difference and where it's going to hit, it's going to be difficult. What was interesting about Ian is you have relatively dense population centers, all along that coastline, and the entire west coast of Florida is incredibly vulnerable to storm surge. So you're basically trying to differentiate between utter disaster, just wiping a community bare, like what you saw in Fort Myers, versus blowing the ocean out, basically having a reverse surge. And you're trying to differentiate between this, and it's just, from a meteorological perspective, it's impossible to do. And it's impossible to communicate that nuance in a world that consumes information in 5-word chunks. And so it was, no matter where it was going to go, it was going to be challenging. But there's an element of this story that never really got told. People got sort of infatuated with other parts of the story. If you remember back, the rapid intensification was not only accurately forecast, but the aggressive messaging, which is atypical. Hurricane Center typically conservative, government, we're not going to go out on a limb. Very strong messaging early on in that forecast that I think saved untold numbers of lives. And the other part, no loss of life is acceptable, but for people who understand that part of the coastline and have studied it for decades, the loss of life was substantially less than all of us feared for a storm like that, a rapidly intensifying near Cat 5, striking the most vulnerable storm surge portion of our coastline with not a lot of notice. I think many of us feared and modeled mortality in the hundreds. And again, I don't want to take away from the loss that did occur, but and that's how you have to think of it. If you think you have to invert it to survive, to mentally survive operating at this level under this much scrutiny. You can't think about what did happen. You have to think about what you prevented or what didn't happen. Otherwise, the heaviness of it all will cripple you, and you'll burn out and won't make it very, very long. So there's so much of that story that never got told, and it's a shame. Hopefully we can in these conferences, and we got one this week at the Florida Governor's Hurricane Conference. Hopefully we can start telling that portion of the story and try to get beyond the immediate reaction that a lot of people had. There's a lot of reaction to the cone. I think everybody saw that and overreacted to the cone. I'm going to be blunt. There isn't a cosmetic change to the cone that we could make that would mysteriously change the outcome that you saw. That's not to say that the cone can't be improved, but the notion that we could go and just cosmetically change the cone and it will just erase the calamities of these storms is just not accurate. I mean, we've got too many people living in the coastline, and a lot of people moving to Florida who have never experienced a hurricane in their life to expect that these folks are going to perfectly understand a hurricane and perfectly understand hurricane products out of the gate is probably just a bridge too far.
Jamie, I saw recently that y'all are upgrading the P-Surge model to version 3.0. I may be right or wrong about that, but talk about that model and its importance and your relationship with it over the past couple of decades.
So P-Surge is the probabilistic wrapper around our storm surge model Slosh. It's been around for a while. We used to have an argument of who was older, me or Slosh. And I'm not sure we've reconciled that argument. This just gives you a sense. And from a modeling perspective, for the modelers on the group, I mean, you find me a model that has survived this long. I mean, that's really remarkable. And a lot of people say it's old and outdated, but it's remarkably stable and remarkably reliable, which in a disaster is what you want. And so it's tried and true, works really, really well. The probabilistic wrapper, what we call P-Surge, is basically using traditional errors of a hurricane and hurricane forecast. We build using the official, skinny black line. We build iterations of that. So, tracks to the left, tracks to the right, more intense, bigger, slower, that sort of stuff. So we end up with about 500 to 1,000 alternative tracks. And then we run Slosh on all those, 1,000 tracks. And if you run enough tracks of something, you can derive a statistically reliable probability, which is the whole goal of P-Surge, a statistically reliable probability. And so it basically produces a probabilistic solution or risk, if you will, of various outcomes. And so this is a modeling system. So I'm not in charge anymore. That's now Cody Fritz is running the storm surge unit at the Hurricane Center. But that modeling system is near and dear to my heart. And to see it upgraded, we'd always dreamed of expanding storm surge and P-surge to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. But it turns out that down there we have steep bathymetry. So, you go off the coast and you get deep really fast. Wave setup or the water rise due to many waves striking the coast is as important or more important than storm surge itself. So one of the things we had to overcome in bringing that modeling system down there was the ability to efficiently, that's the key word, efficiently do nearshore wave predictions, which Neil will tell you that nearshore wave models are traditionally computational pigs.
Yeah, that good luck with that.
So, Jamie, talk about your relationship with the individual National Weather Service offices, those especially the coastal offices, the coordination process, how you get along with them. How is that working these days?
It works great. So National Hurricane Center is part of NCEP, National Centers for Environmental Prediction, which is a part of the Weather Service. A lot of people mistakenly think the Hurricane Center is separate from the National Weather Service. We're very much part of the National Weather Service. And so we provide the big picture, or I like to call it the executive summary, if you will. And then all that information flows into the Weather Service forecast offices, and we coordinate back and forth. And that coordination yields the granular forecast that the people often need to take action. Kim will tell you that social science, really the body of the science is telling us to localize the threat or localize the impact or make it personable to one's community. And that give and take with the National Weather Service forecast offices is the critical component of taking something that's very high level, like the storm is likely to move in this general area and affect this general portion of the coastline, and distilling it down to the highly granular impacts that are necessary for local action. So we generally brief the state level and up, so state and regions and national perspective. The WFOs typically forecast for and brief the local or municipality and county level type impacts.
So we live in a world where a lot of Americans get their weather information now from TikTok and YouTube. TikTokers and YouTubers often have more audience than ABC, CBS, NBC, any of these traditional networks. They're massive. And some of these, not all of them, and understand, I don't want to blanket everybody here, but some of them are rogue. Yeah. And you know the deal. They're going to post deterministic model output that's 15 days out and just do some really outrageous things. But they get this audience, and they're followed with like a religious type zeal, whether they're right or wrong. Where are we going with the messaging with hurricanes over the next 5 to 10 years? Does the Hurricane Center plan to get into that business, or how do we fight that stuff? Is there any room left for professionals? Is it all going to be weather entertainers going forward?
This is a great question. This speaks to the keynote that I gave at the National Hurricane Conference and the one that I'm about to give at for those of you attending the Florida Hurricane Governors Conference. This is a big challenge, not just for the Hurricane Center or the National Weather Service. This is a big challenge for the weather community, and we've got to find a way to come together and fight this, because if we don't, we're going to lose our sense of purpose and tremendous credibility that we've all worked to achieve over the last several decades. And it comes down to, we're not doing enough as a community to emphasize quality, right? That there is a component of value added that is being generated from not just the weather professionals within the Weather Service, but the weather professionals within media, right? Someone like you who is going to add decades of experience to the message. And I spoke earlier about how important it was that inflection and body language and tone, it's not the words, but the inflection and body language and tone. And someone like you that has a tremendous relationship with your viewers and trust. And so you can't fabricate that. You can't. I'm sorry. And AI can't fabricate or reinvent that. We have to lean into that as a community. We have to lean into the value added that the human, and not any human, a trained human, a trained professional provides. And I think we all have to find a way to push back on the hype, which is exhausting people in a hurricane. Kim would have to speak to any studies on this, but based off what little bit I'm hearing from the real world, we're often overhyping people 7 days before an event. And by the time the event gets there and there's real actionable information being portrayed, they're tuned out, they're exhausted, they can't take it anymore. And that's a real shame. And that's something that we're gonna have to do better collectively as a whole, to regain some of that ground that we've lost in all of this, and really convince people. It used to be a saying when it came to purchasing goods that you get what you pay for. I think we got to lean into that message a bit more as a weather community, that you really do get what you pay for.
And I want to make it perfectly clear. This is not a blanket statement against all the TikTokers and the YouTubers. Some are responsible. Some, they're simply passing along information from the Hurricane Center and good, reliable information. But there are a lot of very rogue accounts. Kim, before I move on for one more question, do you have any thoughts you want to share on this whole problem? Because it's coming up soon. I mean, June 1st is coming fast, and we're going to get these rogue accounts, and they're going to show, hey man, the GFS, it's showing a Category 5 coming up on New Orleans, and right. People, the anxiety, it's real, and they can't tune out this stuff. Well, Kim, what do we do?
I don't envy you the challenge of this. This is really hard. You're asking the question that frankly everybody on our planet is asking in every sphere. And it's really, you're hitting on the anxiety around trusting anything that is coming, and especially, what is the role of authoritative sources in much of any judgment. But I will say that one of the things that I hear most commonly when I tell people that I'm trying to work on better communicating forecast information, so like if I just tell this to ordinary people, one of the first things I tend to get is them saying, can you tell your people to stop with the 30 million people are in the bullseye of the severe weather today? Like there is a hype factor that has gone on even in respectable outlets of our community for a long time. And I think one of the things we're going to really have to contend with is, I think we do have to come together, like you're suggesting, to formulate a way to set some ground rules. What are those of us who are going to be the really, we want to have some standard. What is going to be our standard of performance, our ethical boundaries? What will that look like? What will it mean to participate in something like that? And it's a real challenge. You have an extraordinary burden in front of you. The disinformation, I think, in the hurricane space is the most weighty and costly. And I'm just sorry that you have to deal with it.
Yeah, and to name out there organizing a conference, this should drop everything and try to figure out how to work this into the conference, town hall, listening session. This is, I would argue, the most pressing challenge and opportunity before the meteorological community. And if we continue to, I don't think anybody's ignoring it, but we haven't quite moved to action yet as a community. In time's a ticking. We probably should have solved this 2 years ago.
The time is ticking. It's something I will say, we do need to find a balance, because The National Academies of Science, interestingly enough, just a week or two ago, they had a workshop I sat in on the current state of social science on disinformation, misinformation, and trying to combat it. And one of the things that they pointed out is if government officials especially get too wrapped up in it, you run the risk of not sharing enough detailed information. You are motivated to distill the message to some essence so that the bottom line is always followed. And in so doing, that can actually be construed as a kind of mis or disinformation. And so I don't want us to go down a road where we, like what you're talking about doing right now, is to communicate more uncertainty, to give more fidelity and a broader range of the potential outcomes. And just for fear of bad agents, we can't stop doing that.
Right,
So
right.
that'd be something else.
And there's evidence behind what Kim is saying within the meteorological community and sometimes within the broader emergency management community, that there's this fear or conventional wisdom that people can't handle more information. They can't handle probabilistic, they can't handle risk, they can't handle this. And so we're not going to give it to them because they can't handle it. It actually works counter to that. Is people are smart enough to know that you're withholding things from them, and it erodes trust really, really quickly. So, one of the challenges we have as a community is to get out of our own way, if you will, right? That people are probably smarter than we're giving them credit for, and they can absolutely digest probabilistic information. And I'm going to prove it to you with an exercise. So, if I told you that the restaurant that you're going to eat at tomorrow, there's a 20% chance of botulism, food poisoning, then most of you probably won't.
I'm out.
There.
I'm out. Not happening.
Right. And yet none of you are statisticians, right?
Nope.
None of you are stats expert, but it's the way I framed it, right? It's the way I framed it that it was different. And so I think that's our challenge within the community, is to stop arguing that people can't understand risk information and start framing it in a way that they can. People understand probabilities. They understand probabilities quite well. They don't understand impacts and hazards, and that's where we have to do a better job framing this narrative.
Hi, Jamie. It's good to see you. I have a couple of questions, actually. My first question is, whenever a tornado happens and then the Weather Service goes out and they do a survey, we kind of know that process. How does that process work after a hurricane? Because if you're talking a wider scope, many states, does the National Weather Service individual offices get into that, or is it a partnership with the Hurricane Center? How does all that come about?
A great question. And I think I've totally misjudged. The people don't understand this process over the years. So it's coming up more and more. People want to know what happens. So first and foremost, in situ observations or instrumentation in place in front of a storm will never, ever, ever measure an extreme weather event. So what does everybody do after a hurricane makes landfall? They look at ASOS and you look at tide stations, and they say, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. The instrument was only 100 miles per hour. The storm surge was only 6 feet. What happened here, right? So you have got to get over the notion that an in situ observation is going to measure an extreme event. So how many of you have ever seen a tornado or tornadic winds in an ASOS station? Do any of you say afterwards that the tornado didn't happen? So we've got to get over this notion that we're going to measure these things, at least fully. Obviously the in situ observations are going to capture some component of the storm. So we supplement that information, that the available observations. There's a couple things that happen. We put temporary instruments out in front of the hurricane. That's one part. We model retrospectively, or you think forensics, the hurricane after the fact. And then the part I think you were alluding to is there is a damage assessment that does happen after the storm, especially as it pertains to storm surge, because storm surge observations are, the observations are this far apart, and the hurricane goes in between them. And so there's a fair component of a survey that is very, very similar to a tornadic survey, where a human or humans go into the impacted area and try to assess, or from a forensic standpoint, what happened. I underestimated how much interest there was in this component over the years. I've never really talked much about it myself, even though I've done many of them over the years. So I think it's on me to sort of try to talk about this component in more how it's done. It's a hard thing to do because you're confronted with the reality of the event in a very raw and emotional way. I mean, you're walking into someone's home and seeing their possessions strewn all over. So that portion of it, I think, is what makes you want to not talk about it, because it tends to be a very raw emotional experience. But yeah, there is absolutely a component of a damage survey that is akin to a tornado damage survey, where you go into the field and try to assess what's happening to fill in the gaps between the in situ observations. I'm not sure. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. And the other one is to kind of tie to what you're saying, because you said that you've gone out on some of these assessments. And one thing that I'm just always taken by is like someone like Rick or Chris Darden, or someone going and interacting with the folks who have just, lost everything, or they lost family members, and the emotion there. Thinking back on some of your surveys, are there any stories that really kind of stand out to you, or just kind of general sense of what it's like to actually be there and to talk to folks?
Yeah, there was a storm I was surveying down in the Florida Keys. So that would have been what, Irma? I'm trying to think which one it was. Anyway, it's not important to the story. And we're walking around from house to house. Usually you have police escort because you just need it. You've got someone there kind of escorting you around. And so we're walking from one house to the next house, and I look in the road, and there is just this Winnie the Pooh doll or toy right in the middle of the road, and it hits you like a ton of bricks, because that belonged to a young person, like a child. And it's just sitting there out in the open. And I remember kneeling down and looking at that and thinking, what's the story? Where did this come from? Did the person who owned it survive? I was just totally, I'm not always an emotional person in general, especially when I'm in the field, but that one hit me like a ton of bricks. And it hit me so hard that I worked with local officials to find the owner of that toy, to assure that they, were okay and they survived. But there's absolutely a raw human element to see people's possessions, their hopes and their dreams, like everything they ever aspired for in life, just strewn all out in the open. There's like a vulnerability component of it. Imagine if everything in your home were suddenly, so like if you've ever had your home robbed, like you feel very violated. So can you imagine if you have everything inside of your home just thrown out in the open for the world to see? That's kind of the feeling you get when you're doing these surveys. So that one hit particularly hard. There are others where you're in the field and you're trying to like compartmentalize, right? What's happening and remain very professional and collect the data and get out of everyone's way. But occasionally you'll see someone's photograph on the ground or that sort of stuff, and it'll poke the thin veneer of your compartmentalization And it'll all hit you like a ton of bricks, and you just kind of have to just stand there for a minute and get it back together again and move on. Sandy was a particularly difficult storm for me personally. I remember that one was very, very, very difficult. That was in the early days of storm surge, and we hadn't gone public yet with these newer offerings that you now see in a storm. We were testing them internally, and for me, it felt like, have you ever had that dream where you're screaming for help, or you're screaming for someone to hear you, and no one can hear you? That's what Sandy felt like to me, to have all these new capabilities that were on the cusp but not yet ready for prime time. I think all of us working in storm surge could see, a massive storm surge unfolding days in advance, and the inability to communicate that was just deeply, deeply frustrating.
Jamie, thanks so much for your time tonight. But before we close this segment, I've got to ask both you and Neil this question. Who's the best fisherman of you two guys? Who?
Oh, this is a good one. So this is like the relationship game where you ask two people the same question and you see if they get it right. So I'm going to be very political and say I'm the better guide and he's the better fisherman.
I would say when it comes to South Florida, no one's better than Jamie. He has guided me and put me on more fish than I could have ever done myself. Now I just have to return the favor. If he ever comes up to Charleston, I'll put him on some redfish.
No, so if you want data, we're all scientists here. The most recent field experiment, Neil caught 3 redfish and I caught 1.
Well, numbers speak volumes. So give us a typical fishing outing with you two guys to just kind of go through the whole process.
I'll tell you what. Let me tell the story about the neighborhood peacock bass, and then you can tell the story about the crazy shark and the jack. So Jamie lives on this set of lakes, and it's just loaded with peacock bass. So we'll get up in the morning and fix a cup of coffee and walk out there and catch 30 or 40 peacocks in an hour till our arms get tired or we get bored.
So Friday was Neil's first time in Flamingo or Everglades National Park. At one point, he was giving me a hard time about reeling in a fish too fast. He's like, you're horsing that fish. And I was like,
wow.
Yeah, you're gonna see why here shortly. I'm fighting this fish. I mean, this fish is, whipping me pretty good, and I'm fighting him and losing. And all of a sudden, right by the side of the boat, Neil, you described it better than me. Would you say 7-foot shark jumped?
It was at least. I mean, a lot of times if I catch a fish on a fly rod, I'll try to wear it down, because you can't horse a fish on a fly rod because you'll snap the rod. And so anytime I've got a fish on, I tend to play it a little while until it gets tired. And Jamie gets this jack on and he's like just yanking and cranking this thing. And we were in a little bit deeper water, and I was like, lay off that thing. You're going to snap the line. And he's like, I got to get it up to the boat. I was like, what's the rush? And he gets it up to the boat. And I mean, this 7-foot shark jumps. This is like 3 feet away from the side of the boat, jumps out of the water into the air and comes down head first on this jack. And just rips the jack and the line, and I'm just sort of standing there, and Jamie's sitting there with the rod in his hand, the line's broken. I was like, what just happened?
And I will say this whole conversation is full of show titles. I mean, this whole thing is going bananas. Now, do you guys ever come across any alligators?
Not out there. Other places we fish. Absolutely. That where we were fishing Friday was more crocodile land, but we didn't see any. I mean, we probably saw 200 sharks that day, but I don't think we saw any.
Yeah, Jamie was telling me, he's like, we got to go to this place that there's this channel, and I was like, there's not going to be any fish in this channel. I thought he was making it up. I mean, this one of the things I wanted to do was figure out how to fish this channel, which Jamie was telling me all about. So we go to this channel, and it probably had more sharks than fish in it.
Wow.
It was crazy. So there was one more story here that was fun.
Oh, good, good.
At one point, Neil's fly fishing, and this shark is circling the boat really, really close. And I just looked at him and said, "You're about to screw up, and I'm going to crack a beer and watch it." And I did. I sat in the back of the boat, cracked a beer, and watched as he lost a battle to a shark.
Yeah, I hooked this speckled trout, and it was a pretty good size one. And I was like, "Oh, this is a good fish." And Jamie's sitting there laughing at me, watching. And I get this thing up next to the boat, and I think it was a good sized lemon shark comes out of nowhere and just bites the fish clean in half. And there was nothing I could have done to stop it. I mean, I felt kind of awful about it. But on the other hand, these sharks aren't stupid. Like, the shark had obviously figured out there's an easy game plan here. It's figure out who's out there fishing and just hang out by their boat.
Wow. You guys need to live stream the next expedition. Whenever this is, you need to just live stream it so we can all watch.
It might be too censored. I don't know.
Some of the show titles were, Jamie.
Yeah. All right. Well, we do have to take a break here. And again, Jamie, you're welcome to stay. We've got a little bit more to go here in the show here. If you have to go, you take off. But thanks so much for your time. It's great to have you. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for your calm voice, your knowledge. It's just been a joy knowing that you're there in that position. So thanks for your work. You never get thanked enough, but thank you.
No, it was a treat. This is a treat to talk with colleagues and friends. It can be a little bit of a bubble working inside the Hurricane Center. So the opportunity to talk to people talk to colleagues especially is a treat. So thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's take a quick break here. We're going to hear from Tony Rice, and then we've got Jen's This Week in Tornado History. We'll come back with Bruce Jones. Bill, is Bruce going to join us tonight? Do we know? I've not seen him hop in.
I'm not good at inviting him anymore. Make him feel bad. Yeah, I'll get him on the line right now.
Okay, so we'll talk with Bruce Jones of Midland. We will do a weather roundup and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center forecasted another moderate geomagnetic storm this past Sunday evening. You might have noticed that these tend to be coming a little more often, prompting many to wonder what's going on. It's a very natural upswing that we see every solar cycle. A solar cycle is an 11-year ebb and flow of activity on the sun. It's measured by a count of sunspots. Sunspots are cool spots on the sun's surface that all that energy coming out of the core must route around, and this creates some stress on the magnetic fields, causing filaments and prominences many times longer than the Earth is wide to either fall back onto the solar surface and be reabsorbed, or sometimes break, causing coronal mass ejections, or CMEs. The last solar minimum was in late 2020 when nary a sunspot was visible, ending solar cycle 24 and beginning the current solar cycle of 25. It's not a puff of white smoke that announces the next solar cycle, but a flip of the sun's magnetic fields. The sun's north and south poles switch. Over the next 5 years or so, activity increases until solar maximum is reached. Along the way, you'll see more coronal mass ejections, solar flares, and all that other space weather that the SWPC keeps an eye on. Though most of the spacecraft and methodologies used to drive those forecasts are relatively new, the technology to monitor those sunspots has been around a long time. And when you look across the 400 years of records that are available, there are cycles that appear within those cycles. Solar maximums have tended to get more maximum for a couple of solar cycles and then less so for a few more solar cycles. Interestingly, they also tend to vacillate between big solar maximums and then smaller solar maximums. Keep in mind that these are separated by 11 years. The patterns provide sufficient information to build forecasts of when the next maximum might be and how many sunspots might be there, therefore how great a risk of geomagnetic storms. But back to those recent increases. Yes, they are somewhat expected, but the sunspot count is also outperforming those forecasts by a significant amount. This suggests that the trend will not only continue upward, but that our next solar maximum will be even more maximum after a trend downward since solar cycle 22 back in the 90s. You can play with this data for yourself, going back to 1749 on NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center website. Click on Products and Data, and then Solar Cycle Progression. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, per the Storm Prediction Center, 13 tornadoes occurred on May the 12th, 1956, 10 of which were in the state of Michigan, and there were 2 that were later rated F4, one in Wayne County and the second in Genesee County and into the Flint area. This tornado developed into the southeastern part of the city around 6:25 p.m. Eastern Time, just west of where present-day I-475 runs adjacent to Thread Lake. It dissipated northwest of Atlas. 71 homes, 5 commercial buildings, and 71 other structures were destroyed. A television station antenna was toppled, and some witnesses reported 2 or 3 funnels visible at the time of the storm. From a summary of the event from the National Weather Service in Detroit, one couple caught outdoors found shelter in a ditch, and though the couple suffered severe cuts, they did survive. Many others sought shelter in basements. 22 neighbors crowded into one basement, and in another one, though the furnace was pulled from one corner to the other, the occupants survived. Thank God for basements was the comment of one family member on Gilmartin Street in the aftermath of the tornado, whose home had its roof torn off and a 4x6 piece of wood driven through the wall. In addition, another family in their car, as the tornado and its debris approached, were able to get inside a store and move to the rear of the structure. This family survived, though the car was demolished. We have a complete summary about this event at tornadotalk.com.
All right, let's dig into the email inbox and just maybe something's in there this week.
Thank you so much, everybody, for sending us emails, whether it's your encouragement, which you've had some great encouragement, folks who are fans of the show, or show ideas. We really appreciate it. Wanted to talk about this email in from Steve Holmes. He sent that in today. First of all, he asked, have you talked about bistatic radar? I don't think we have. I don't know anything about that.
No.
That's a Neil question.
Yeah. It uses
No.
a passive receiver to take in echoes from another radar's transmissions.
I'll have to read up on that and get back to you.
Yeah, he
I
said
think
apparently
it's-
it's being used in Germany, he said.
Interesting.
I'll check it out when I'm over there at the end of the
Well, the rest of the world will figure it out 20 years from now.
month. James A., you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I remember talking to somebody a couple of years ago about it, and it seemed to have more aerospace, like airborne target applications than hydrometeor applications, but I don't know. That's way past my little
Yeah, I spent a while trying to figure out how to convert like onboard radar from planes into some usable metric. And the problem was the planes were just moving so fast that you couldn't back out any useful information because you needed their position. And the gain, the pilots can change the gain on the radar and totally change everything.
So Kim, do you see Dr. Harold Brooks anymore in your new job?
Oh man, yeah. I see him all the time. If there's a question for Harold, I can ask.
Well, ask him if he has any folks that are working in that bistatic radar, and we'll get them booked over here from Germany. I know he has a lot of knowledge of the German language.
He does. He's abroad right now at the European Severe Storms Conference, so he might have some insight if it's something specifically European. I can ask when
It'd be good to have him back on too. We haven't had him in way too long.
That would be delightful. I'm happy to ask.
Awesome. So Steve also brought up this, and I'm going to leave parts out to protect the innocent, but he just had a question here. There was some coverage last night where I guess there were 2 active tornado warnings in the market, and they returned to regular programming. And he goes, yes, it was an American Idol, and yes, it's sweeps month, but is this a trend? Are some station chains more willing to do extended coverage than are others? And so I guess for the TV folks, what do you guys see with that? I don't understand all of it, like who makes those decisions and how do you, if there were 2 tornado warnings, I don't see span not doing that coverage. Or
Boy, was that a belly laugh I heard?
Yes, I was waiting to see what Okie James came up with there. So
Yeah, go James A.
There's a lot of market norm here too. If the market has always done this, there's this inertia that it will continue doing it. I know Wichita doesn't make a practice of doing that in really rural western parts of Kansas unless there is a town affected, but in areas where the population is dense, you know, and again, the meteorologist in several cases, it's not up to them to make the coverage decisions either. Thankfully, I'm at a place where we are, and not an eye is batted at any tornado warning coverage we want to do, even if there's not a tornado warning in effect.
And we have the same deal here. And of course, the question is, what happens if you have a tornado warning? And then look, linear television, it's not what it used to be. Most people are going to go home and watch Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime. So it's not a big issue now, but from time to time, you might have a big high impact live sports event on your channel, maybe Alabama versus Auburn. And, we have to decide how we're going to handle that. And in my position, we have two full power TV stations in the same market that I can go over one of the other ones. And that would not bother me. I want people watching on the phone. I don't care which one they're watching on. So there are alternative ways of doing that. But I am green lighted here, just like James A. And I think he's right. It's market to market. It's just going to vary from market to market. But where we are, we just always do it.
Excellent. One last question here. This came in from Chuck Knight. Could you please add your podcast to Amazon Music? I prefer using their app to listen to podcasts. Is there a way to get it on Amazon Music?
I will research that and see if we can make that happen. There's so many different podcast apps, and they seem to work off a centralized directory or source. I don't know whether that's Apple or whatever, but I will look into that. So
awesome. Thanks, everybody, for sending your email. You can send show suggestions and comments and questions, email at weatherbrains.com, and also sign up for our newsletter so you can get that into your email box every Thursday morning. There's a little link on our homepage. You can click on that and sign up for that. All right, back to you, James.
All right, Bill, you want to talk about weather radio since Bruce isn't here tonight?
Yeah, kind of sad not to have Bruce, but I've been spending a lot of time looking back at the April 3rd, 1974 outbreak in the past couple of weeks, reading a lot of eyewitness accounts and remembering back to our friend J.B. Elliott. I had interviewed J.B. and Jay Shelley, after the super outbreak in 2011 here in Alabama, and I got some fascinating material from those two, because they worked together at the Weather Service in Birmingham, and this was pre-weather radio. And I thought today when I saw that just spectacular package on Rick Smith on the May 8th, 2003 tornadoes in Moore and Oklahoma City, watching him do weather radio live. And of course, that probably wasn't, JB used to go live all the time, and it was spectacular when we finally got it in November of 1976. But it just underscored the importance of that medium. And Rick, he sounds just like Rick we know now, and he knew the pronunciation of every small town, and I don't think he had been there very long at that point. But the coolest thing was this mustache he had. It is epic. You'll have to go back and somehow maybe James can play that package sometime when we're back on. But it just underscored to me the importance that weather radio has taken and how much we rely on it. I could not wait for it to get to Birmingham. I had been able to pick up the coastal stations, because there was one in Mobile, and you could hear it on a regular VHF radio. And I just couldn't wait for that to get to Birmingham, and it became a life-saving, changing thing. But Bruce and Midland Radio are so nice to sponsor the show, and they also make an offer available to all of our listeners and viewers. And if you can go over to their website, at midlandusa.com. 25% off if you just know how to spell span correctly. SPANN 25. And I doubt there's an American that doesn't know how to spell that name. But use that promo code and you'll get 25% off. We're still waiting to hear back from Bruce to see whether that works in Canada. But maybe he'll be back next week. He's probably, in some fancy location. Last week he was at Lake Tahoe, so there's no telling where he is this week. Maybe he took my place in the Virgin Islands and is working down there this week. But we appreciate Midland what they do for us, and it's our job as WeatherBrains listeners and panelists to be ambassadors and emissaries for this life-saving work. And I know you feel the same way, James.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's still stunning to me how many people don't have one of these things in very tornado-prone areas. And so just consider doing it as a gift, for your family. And again, if you've got one, great. A lot of people that obviously listen to this show, you're weather dweebs, but be sure your neighbors have one, those in your family. So use the promo code SPAN25 for 25% off. All right, let's do a weather roundup. And I guess, Jen, we'll kind of start with you since you're been watching everything tonight. How's it going?
Yeah, it looks like watch still up north of Joplin. There's a storm in that area. Watch covers Joplin, Springfield, Poplar Bluff, Park Hills area, Cape Girardeau. So it's just been active with different little clusters here. They're kind of all over the place. And we've had storms not too far from me. We're starting to see those drifting in from eastern Indiana near Fort Wayne, heading into northwestern Ohio. But it's just kind of a mess. But I'm not seeing any tornadoes right now, which is great. But we do have the severe thunderstorms, and we've had some pretty large hail and damaging winds with some of those storms. And we've had some big stuff in Texas, Troy Kimmel. I'm seeing that into west of Kerrville and south of Abilene, that area.
Yeah, Troy, what you got down there?
Well, yeah, as Jen mentions, we got about twice tonight during the broadcast. I had to turn the mic off because of no weather radio going off. But earlier today, down southeast of Austin, around LaGrange, Texas, there was a persistent supercell. This thing sat there for a couple of hours, and we, I think, got reports up to 3 to 4 inches of rain and large hail with it. That storm then died out, and we have one currently ongoing northern parts of Burnett County, Texas, northwest of Austin. And I'm looking at that, and we've had 1.25-inch diameter hail out of that one. So it's just been, this weather pattern in Texas lately, Jen, to watch these cells. Last Friday, they would move one direction for 5 minutes and sit stationary, and then turn southeast, and then shift back to the west. And it's the same sort of thing we've seen today as well. And while they're doing that, Jen, as you know, some of these things have had some beautiful hooks, but in velocity data, there was no gate-to-gate shear. These things were spinning around themselves, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Neil, how's that fishing weather?
It's looking pretty good. We had a high setup just northeast of Florida that had the winds, east winds, pretty strong over the last probably 36 hours, but it looks like it's going to die down. So yeah, things are looking nice and calm and fun.
So what hour of the day do you head out?
Tomorrow, probably do some work in the morning, and then maybe head down to Flamingo in the afternoon. It's a late afternoon high tide, so the incoming tide is up on the flats. Is going to be the best. So get the work done early and then go fish in the afternoon.
I like it. I like it a lot. All right, James A. How's your storm situation? Looks like they're staying north of you, huh?
Yep, all is quiet. The cams through the evening have kept it all just out of my DMA. So there's happiness. I'll go home in time tonight and probably celebrate the end of the semester. One more down, couple more check boxes to go. But end of the week, we've got deep moisture, lots of instability, but very little deep layer shear. So it's going to be rainy and unsettled and stormy, and I don't think we'll have to be on too high of alert for it, which is amazing for mid-May. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
Kim,
was-
Kim,
exactly.
what's going on with you down there?
Yeah, same. Very, very same air mass and conditions. And it's wonderful. This is the best you can hope for in May. We need the rain. And I think parts of your DMA and our DMA are just in this like straddle boundary between D4 drought and doing just fine. It's this very distinct boundary through Oklahoma. And we just need every opportunity to get rain across the broad region as we can get. So this is the kind of pattern that actually maybe we'll get some of those D4 drought areas, some precipitation. We're not just banking on the dry line here. So yeah, this is very, very welcomed and just a wonderful, I love when I can be in Oklahoma and have thunderstorms and not worry about death. It's just so lovely.
I might sit on my porch and actually enjoy it.
Yeah, right? I know. Yeah, be great.
Amazing things happen. All right, well, let's do picks of the week. We'll kind of shift gears. And Kim, since you've got the floor, let's just kick it back over to you for your pick of the week this week.
Sure. Well, inspired by our conversation today, I have the recording of that workshop the National Academies just held a couple of weeks ago on misinformation, disinformation, and how to overcome it. So sort of state of the social science. So I think that could be of interest to a lot of people.
Indeed. Great. And again, all the picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. Neil, what's your pick of the week?
I wanted to plug NOAA's SARSAT program. So this is a search and rescue satellite aided tracking. So I've had a personal locator beacon for as long as I can remember, but I went in and re-registered it and changed some information with a new phone number and stuff, and got this letter, like it said official business on it from INSOF at NESDIS. From NOAA. And I was like, what is NOAA doing emailing me like, or snail mailing me a letter of official business? And I thought maybe this has something to do with my previous job. And I opened it up and it was just my SARSAT registration. But yeah, this is a really cool program. It's basically you get a device, and if you're ever like in the backwoods, outside of cell service, offshore, literally anywhere in the ocean or middle of nowhere in the mountains, you can push and hold this button and it will use satellite telecommunication systems to pinpoint your location and alert authorities, and they will instantly send help for you. I can't tell you how many lives this has saved. It's one of the most underappreciated programs that NOAA does, that people don't realize that NOAA actually does until you actually have to register your beacon and it goes to a NOAA website. It's an amazing program.
Wow, that is life-saving, and that's great. And again, we'll put the link and the information up on weatherbrains.com. James A., what's your pick of the week?
My pick of the week, I feel slightly guilty for this since Rick is not here to defend himself. But Oklahoma Tornadoes DB had tweeted a pic from that of Rick standing at his duty station. What was that, 20 years ago, Bill? I think.
Yeah, May 8th, 2003.
Man, between the glorious almond-colored CRT monitor that probably weighed 70 pounds and the glorious mustache, it's just so amazing.
Wow, I like it. All right. Awesome. Troy, what you got for us? Go.
Got kind of an interesting story that I think I've told you before that we were kind of concerned about, but back during COVID, back in 2020, co-op station up in Corinth in Alcorn County, Mississippi, that I often talk about, unfortunately, you lost the co-op observer. And of course, it has 100-year plus record. It's non-continuous. And I started pushing that we really needed to have that co-op observer replaced. I want to thank Katie McNeil. Katie is the observation program leader over in Memphis at the Weather Service. By the way, Shelley and men from Huntsville, from the weather office there, they met, and actually Shelley came in and helped her. And this last week, the middle part of last week, they installed a co-op station at the airport. My friend Donna, who's airport manager there, has taken responsibility for that. We now have that co-op station returned to service. Thank you, National Weather Service in Memphis. Thank you, National Weather Service in Huntsville, for contributing, Katie and also Shelley. I have posted for you on my website here at the university a PDF to the Daily Corinthian in Mississippi. They did a nice front page story. And even other people from Memphis from the Weather Service came over and spent their day helping them. So it was a great story. I appreciate it, National Weather Service.
I like it. I like it a lot. My pick, by the way, you know what happens next month? The 50th, 50 years AMS conference on broadcast meteorology. Troy, you weren't at that first one, were you?
I'm sorry. What'd you say, James?
Yeah. What? I can't hear you. What? Troy and I, we were close.
We were at those first
we were that close. But yeah, 50 years coming up next month. So that's in the program agenda. It's all there on the AMS side. All right, Jen, what you got for us?
So Jamie brought up earlier about how AI won't completely get rid of the human touch, which I hope is the case, as we now have AI generated DJs hit the airwaves on Radio GPT. And so this is an article about this endeavor to fill airtime slots with AI generated scripts and voices locally tailored with news content to provide listeners stuff locally. And it's a little unnerving as a radio gal, and I do know that there's a huge effort to do this with weather, and in fact, there are already companies that are out there doing that. So my competition already is the AI voice, but what are you going to do? It's like Jamie said, you can go cheaply, but you're not going to get that human voice and the interaction and what have you. But the radio industry has changed so much and has become so automated. And they're saying that it's not a way to, get rid of radio. It's actually to help it. They have lost a lot of their localisms, but how local can you really be if you're not a human being? So it's a little unnerving with that. And I was talking to my best friend Sally about it, who went through Ian down in Southwest Florida. And she's like, you cannot teach an AI bot how to do hurricane coverage and aftermath coverage, because those areas relied on radio, not television. They relied on their radio. She did, and she listened to it. And where are the Red Cross stations? Where are the evacuation routes prior to the whatever? As soon as you lose that power, you need your radio. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
We live in interesting times. We certainly do. All right, Bill Murray, go.
Yeah, I'm not going to take the foghorn tonight.
Ooh.
EU METSAT viewer for Europe, Africa, and Asia, I just thought was fascinating. And they've just launched a new satellite in March. And the viewer is fabulous. And we're going over to Germany at the end of the month, and I'm looking forward to that. So I'm beginning to get familiar with the weather and climate of Bavaria and the area that we're going to be in. And it was cool to see some satellite pictures from that region today and start to get familiar with the weather over there before we go. So that's my pick of the week. Next week I'll be gone, but we've got a fabulous show. WeatherBrains 904 will be about Dust Bowl 2.0, and it is going to be a great show. David Hogg is going to be there. One of you will need to take that and lead with it. But Dr. Jacobs, thank you for tonight for getting Jamie on. He's just a spectacular guest. And Jen wrote me today and said, wait a minute, the topic changed. What is this fishing with NHC thing? But it turned out to be a really incredible show. And thank you for putting it together.
Yeah, great show. But by the way, Bill, you mentioned JB. Before we close, I got to pull up one of my favorite JB Elliott bits from way long ago. Check this out.
JB, did you see this one today? Indian girls plow fields naked in attempt to bring rain.
Oh, no.
No? Now, you've never done this, have you, during a drought?
Yes.
You have plowed fields naked.
16, and I was just so hot.
It was the 1952 heat wave.
I was just so hot. I was just so hot.
That's great. I mean, goodness gracious, I miss JB so much. That little bit. Some of those gags make me happy. But listen, we do have to run here. If you are new, WeatherBrains is typically on the air every Monday night at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern. Some watch it live, youtube.com/weatherbrains, but most of you listen to the podcast version. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening or watching. On behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless. It was a fun show tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Good job.
Really was.
Yeah, thanks. See ya.
All right.
See y'all in 2
Good
weeks.
luck.